My parents always worshipped my sister, but the moment she got a job, they threw me out, calling me a freeloader. The next day she walked into her new office, smirking, "Are you here begging for a maid job?" I met her gaze smiling. "No, I'm here to hand you your termination letter." Her face drained of color. As she stumbled back, growing up in the Martinez household, I learned early that love came with conditions, and apparently, I never met them. My name is Jessica, and for 26 years, I lived in the shadow of my younger sister Sarah. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was perpetually the disappointment. Sarah was born when I was 4, and from that moment, it felt like I ceased to exist in my parents' eyes. She was 24 now, having taken 6 years to finish her communications degree at community college due to changing majors multiple times and taking breaks to find herself. Every milestone, every achievement, every breath she took was celebrated like she'd cured cancer. Meanwhile, my accomplishments were either ignored or somehow twisted to highlight how Sarah would do it better. When Sarah learned to walk, Mom called it everyone she knew. When I graduated summa cum laude from college, Dad asked if Sarah might want to consider that same school someday. When Sarah got her driver's license, they bought her a brand new Honda Civic. When I got mine, they handed me the keys to our 15-year-old Toyota with a broken air conditioner and told me I was lucky to get anything at all. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was glaringly obvious to everyone except my parents, who seemed genuinely confused whenever I brought it up. "We love you both equally," Mom would say, right before asking me to move my college graduation party because it conflicted with Sarah's high school dance recital. I tried everything to win their approval. I excelled academically, graduating with a degree in business administration while working 2 part-time jobs to pay my way. I was responsible, never caused trouble, helped around the house without being asked. None of it mattered. Sarah could fail 3 classes and get grounded for sneaking out, and she'd still be their precious angel who was just going through a phase. After college, I moved back home temporarily while job hunting. The plan was to save money for a few months, then get my own place. I landed a position at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm, within 6 weeks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a stepping stone. I worked in their HR department, handling everything from recruitment to employee relations. What my parents didn't know was that I'd thrown myself into my work with the same dedication I'd applied to everything else in life. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted twice. By year 3, I was the senior HR manager. By year 5, I was director of human resources. I was good at my job, really good. I had an eye for talent, could spot problematic employees from a mile away, and had streamlined our hiring process to be both efficient and thorough. But at home, I was still just Jessica, the daughter who couldn't do anything right. Even when I contributed a fair amount to household expenses and helped with groceries, my parents acted like I was doing the bare minimum. They never asked about my actual responsibilities at work or seemed interested in my career progression. Meanwhile, Sarah coasted through community college, changing majors 4 times, funded entirely by Mom and Dad. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was 28, had been living at home for 5 years since graduating college at 23, and had just received another promotion with a substantial raise. I was finally ready to move out and had been apartment hunting. I came home excited to share the news about my promotion and my plans to find my own place. Instead, I walked into what felt like an intervention. Mom, Dad, and Sarah were sitting in the living room, all wearing serious expressions. Dad gestured for me to sit down, his face grave like he was about to deliver news of a terminal illness. "Jessica, we need to talk," he began, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You're 26 years old. You've been living in this house for 5 years and frankly, we're tired of supporting you." I blinked, confused. "Supporting me? Dad, I pay rent. I buy my own food. I pay for my own car insurance and cell phone. I even help with utilities." Mom shook her head dismissively. "That's not enough anymore. Sarah just got a job at Sterling & Associates as a marketing coordinator. She's showing real initiative, real growth. She's ready to be independent." My stomach dropped. Sterling & Associates. I knew that company well. They were a mid-sized marketing firm that occasionally partnered with consulting companies like ours on larger projects. Sarah had been hired there? She'd finally finished her degree just 8 months ago and had been job hunting since. "That's great for Sarah," I said carefully, "but I don't understand what that has to do with me." Sarah leaned forward, her face lit up with that familiar smug expression she'd worn since childhood. "It means, Jess, that while you've been hiding in your safe little HR job, some of us are actually ambitious. Some of us are willing to take risks and aim higher." The irony was suffocating. I'd been promoted to director level while she was just starting as a coordinator, but somehow she was the ambitious one. Dad nodded approvingly at Sarah. "Exactly. Sarah's showing us what real drive looks like. She's not content to just settle." "Settle?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "I've been promoted 4 times in 5 years. I manage a team of 12 people. I make more money than both of you combined." The room went silent. I'd never told them about my salary or my level of responsibility. In their minds, I was still the entry-level worker who'd moved back home after college. Mom waved her hand dismissively. Money isn't everything, Jessica. It's about growth, about pushing yourself. Sarah's willing to start fresh, to prove herself in a competitive environment. And I'm not? When was the last time you challenged yourself? Sarah asked, her voice dripping with condescension. When was the last time you took a real risk? You've been at the same company for 5 years, Jess. That's not career growth, that's stagnation. I felt the familiar sting of being misunderstood, but this time it was accompanied by something else, anger. Real, burning anger. They had no idea what I'd accomplished, no interest in learning about my actual life, but they were ready to judge me based on their ignorant assumptions. You know what, I said, standing up, you're right. I have been too comfortable. Too safe. Dad nodded, looking pleased. We're glad you're finally seeing, so I'll be out by the weekend. The satisfaction on their faces faltered slightly. I think they'd expected me to beg, to promise to do better, to ask for more time. Good, Mom said, though she looked uncertain. We think this will be good for you. Force you to really apply yourself. Sarah was practically glowing. Don't worry, Jess. Once you're out on your own, you'll understand what real independence feels like. Maybe you'll even find the motivation to actually advance your career instead of just existing. I nodded slowly, my mind already working. You know, Sarah, you're absolutely right. I think this change is exactly what I needed. That weekend, I moved into a beautiful one-bedroom apartment across town. It was in a high-rise building with a doorman, a gym, and a view of the city skyline. I'd been able to afford the deposit and first few months' rent easily, the benefits of actually having the successful career my family assumed I lacked. The moving process itself was liberating in ways I hadn't expected. As I packed up 5 years' worth of belongings from my childhood bedroom, I found myself rediscovering parts of my identity that had been buried under years of family dysfunction. Awards from college, commendation letters from work, photos with colleagues at company events, evidence of a life and career that my family had never acknowledged. I hired professional movers, something that would have seemed extravagant to my parents but was easily within my budget. As they carried my furniture and boxes into the elevator of my new building, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just an apartment, it was proof of my independence and success. The first night in my new place, I ordered expensive sushi and opened a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for a special occasion. Sitting on my new couch, looking out at the city lights, I realized this was the first space in my adult life that was entirely mine. No family photos featuring Sarah prominently while I lingered in the background, no awards ceremonies I wasn't invited to attend, no conversations that somehow always circled back to Sarah's latest accomplishment. On Sunday evening, I got a text from Sarah, "Hope you're not struggling too much in whatever tiny place you found. Remember, it's never too late to work harder." I didn't respond, but I did take a photo of my view and saved it to my phone. Maybe someday I'd share it, but for now, I was content knowing the truth. The next morning, I woke up in my own space for the first time in 5 years and felt genuinely excited about the day ahead. No tiptoeing around the house to avoid family drama, no listening to Sarah complain about her job search over breakfast, no pointed comments from Dad about my lack of ambition. At work, several colleagues noticed my improved mood. My assistant, Maria, commented that I seemed particularly energetic during our Monday morning briefing. New apartment, new energy, I told her, and it wasn't entirely a joke. That week, I threw myself into my work with renewed focus. I had 3 major projects underway: restructuring the HR department for a tech startup, conducting executive searches for a manufacturing company, and developing a comprehensive employee retention program for a nonprofit organization. Each project required different skills and approaches, but they all benefited from my years of experience and the expertise I built through continuous learning and professional development. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my family saw me as stagnant and unambitious, I was actually juggling multiple high-level consulting projects that other HR professionals in the city would kill for. I built relationships with executives at dozens of companies, earned certifications in organizational psychology and change management, and developed a reputation for solving complex personnel problems that other consultants couldn't handle. One of my favorite projects that week involved helping a family-owned business transition from their founding generation to the next. The dynamics reminded me painfully of my own family's situation: older generation assumptions about capability, younger generation frustration with being underestimated, sibling rivalries that threaten business operations. But in this case, I was able to facilitate conversations that led to understanding and productive change. I wondered if there was a consultant who could fix my family dynamic, though I suspected it might be too late for that. By Thursday, I'd received 2 new client inquiries and a call from a headhunter asking if I'd be interested in a VP position at a Fortune 500 company. I politely declined the headhunter. I loved my current role and the variety of challenges it provided, but the call reminded me just how far I'd come in my career. That evening, I decided to treat myself to dinner at a high-end restaurant downtown. As I sat at the bar, enjoying a perfectly prepared salmon and a glass of expensive wine, I overheard a conversation between 2 women about work-life balance and career advancement. One was complaining about feeling stuck in her job, about family members who didn't understand her ambitions, about the difficulty of being taken seriously in a competitive field. I wanted to tell her that sometimes the people who should support you most will be the last to recognize your worth, but that it doesn't make your accomplishments any less real. Instead, I finished my meal and headed home to my beautiful apartment, grateful for the peace and clarity that came with finally living authentically. Friday morning brought an unexpected email from my college alumni association. They were nominating me for their Young Professional Achievement Award based on recommendations from colleagues and supervisors. The nomination form required detailed information about career progression, community involvement, and professional accomplishments. As I filled it out, I was struck by how impressive my resume looked on paper. Multiple promotions, significant increases in responsibility, recognition from industry peers, involvement in professional organizations. It was the career trajectory of someone who had been anything but stagnant or unambitious. I submitted the application and sent copies to a few professional mentors who had supported me over the years. Their responses were overwhelmingly positive, with several commenting on how much I'd accomplished at such a young age. One mentor, Dr. Patricia Williams, who had been my organizational psychology professor in graduate school, wrote back, "Jessica, I've watched many students build their careers over the years, but few have shown the combination of strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and professional integrity that you've demonstrated. You should be very proud of what you've built." The validation felt good, but it also highlighted how isolated I'd been from people who actually understood and appreciated my work. My family's dismissal of my career had made me question my own achievements, even when external evidence clearly showed I was succeeding beyond most people's expectations. Monday morning came, and I arrived at Morrison & Associates early, as usual. I had a busy day ahead. We were in the middle of reviewing several new client contracts, and I needed to assess our staffing capabilities for the upcoming projects. Around 10 a.m., my assistant knocked on my office door. "Jessica? There's someone here to see you. Says it's about a staffing inquiry for one of our new clients." I looked up from the contract I was reviewing. "Did they schedule an appointment?" "No, but she says it's urgent." "Something about Sterling & Associates?" My blood went cold. Sterling & Associates. Sarah's new company. "Send her in," I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart was suddenly racing. A minute later, my assistant returned with a middle-aged woman in a sharp business suit. She had short gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades in corporate management. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Linda Chen, Vice President of Operations at Sterling & Associates. I apologize for dropping by without an appointment, but we have an urgent situation." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit. How can I help you?" Linda sat down, her expression grim. "We've recently hired someone for our marketing coordinator position about 3 weeks ago, and frankly, it's becoming clear that we made a mistake. The hire was, well, let's just say the person responsible for the hiring decision may have been influenced by factors other than qualifications." I kept my face neutral. "That's unfortunate. How does Morrison & Associates factor into this?" "We've heard excellent things about your HR consulting services, particularly your expertise in damage control and personnel transitions. We need to handle this termination carefully. The employee in question has already made some concerning comments about lawsuits and discrimination, despite the fact that the termination is purely performance-based." My mind was spinning. "Sarah?" They were talking about Sarah. "What kind of performance issues are we discussing?" I asked professionally. Linda sighed. "In her 3 weeks with us, she's missed 6 days of work, called in sick 4 times and simply no-showed twice. When she has been present, she spent most of her time on personal phone calls or social media. She's submitted 3 project proposals, and all of them contained significant plagiarized content. The most recent one was almost entirely copied from our competitor's website." I nodded thoughtfully. "And you need assistance with the termination process?" "Exactly. We need to ensure everything is documented properly, that we follow all legal requirements, and that the transition is handled professionally. We'd also like your firm to handle the termination meeting itself. Sometimes it's easier when it comes from a neutral third party." This was it. The universe was handing me the most perfect revenge on a silver platter. "I think we can definitely help you," I said. "When would you need this handled?" "Ideally tomorrow. We can't afford to let this situation continue, and frankly, the other employees are starting to notice the disparity in work quality and attendance. We prefer to handle this first thing in the morning when she typically arrives, around 9 a.m. when she shows up at all." After Linda left, I sat in my office for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. Sarah, the ambitious one, the one who was showing real initiative, was about to be fired from her first real job for being lazy and dishonest. And I, the supposed underachiever, the freeloader, the one who was just settling, was going to be the one to deliver her termination letter. The cosmic justice was almost too perfect to believe. I'd spent years watching Sarah coast through life while being praised for her potential, while my actual achievements were dismissed as playing it safe. Now reality was catching up with both of us in the most dramatic way possible. I called my assistant Maria into my office. I need you to reschedule my 3 p.m. meeting with the Hartwell Group. Something urgent has come up with a Sterling & Associates consultation. Maria nodded efficiently. Should I push it to tomorrow morning? Yes, first thing. And I'll need you to prepare a complete termination package, all the standard documents, plus we'll need to customize everything to match Sterling's policies and procedures. As Maria left to handle the scheduling changes, I opened my computer and began researching Sterling & Associates more thoroughly. I'd heard of them, of course, they were one of our main competitors in the consulting space, but I wanted to understand their corporate culture, their recent projects, and most importantly, how they ended up hiring someone as clearly unqualified as Sarah appeared to be. What I discovered was interesting. Sterling had recently landed several major clients and was expanding rapidly. Unlike what I'd initially thought, they weren't really a direct competitor, they focused more on marketing and brand development, while we specialized in organizational consulting. They occasionally partnered with firms like ours on larger projects, which explained why they'd reached out to us for HR support. I also found Sarah's LinkedIn profile, which she'd apparently updated recently to reflect her new position. Her summary was full of buzzwords about dynamic marketing solutions and innovative brand strategies, but it was clear from her work history that she'd never actually implemented any such strategies. Her previous experience consisted of a summer internship at a local nonprofit and a part-time job at a clothing store during college. Somehow, she'd managed to parlay that into a marketing coordinator position at a major consulting firm. The more I researched, the more I understood how this situation had developed. Sterling was growing fast, Sarah had probably interviewed well, she'd always been charming when she wanted to be, and they'd made a hiring decision based on potential rather than proven ability. It was a classic mistake that I'd seen dozens of companies make over the years. I spent the next few hours preparing meticulously. I reviewed Sterling & Associates' employee handbook, researched their HR policies, and drafted all the necessary termination documents. Everything had to be perfect, professional, and legally sound. But as I worked, I found myself thinking about the broader implications of what was about to happen. This wasn't just about Sarah losing her job, it was about years of family dynamics that had never been addressed, assumptions that had never been questioned, and a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I'd accomplished. I thought about all the times Sarah had been praised for her ambition while my steady career progression was dismissed as playing it safe. I remembered family dinners where Dad would talk about Sarah's internship application like she was applying to be the next CEO of Google, while my actual promotions were met with polite indifference. There was a part of me that felt sorry for Sarah. She'd been set up to fail in a way, raised to believe that charm and potential were enough, that hard work and competence were somehow less valuable than big dreams and bold statements. Our parents had done her no favors by constantly praising her mediocre efforts while ignoring my substantial achievements. But there was a larger part of me that felt vindicated. Finally, reality was aligning with truth. Finally, competence was being rewarded and incompetence was being addressed. Finally, I was going to be in a position where my family couldn't ignore or dismiss my professional capabilities. Around noon, I called Linda Chen to confirm the details of the termination meeting. She sounded stressed and tired. Ms. Martinez, I have to tell you, the situation has gotten worse since this morning. The employee in question showed up around 11:30 and immediately got into an argument with her supervisor about her project deadlines. Apparently, she accused him of not giving her enough guidance and said the company's expectations were unrealistic for someone still learning the ropes. I shook my head, though Linda couldn't see it. That's unfortunate, but it does support the termination decision. Has she completed any satisfactory work since starting? Honestly? Not really. Even the projects that weren't plagiarized were well below the standard we expect from a coordinator-level position. It's like she doesn't understand the basic requirements of professional work. This was exactly what I'd suspected. Sarah had probably never received honest feedback about her work quality because everyone, teachers, parents, even her college professors, had been focused on encouraging her rather than challenging her to actually improve. Don't worry, Ms. Chen. We'll handle this professionally and efficiently. I'll be there at 2 p.m. as planned. As I hung up the phone, I realized this situation was bigger than just Sarah's employment issues. This was about accountability, about the difference between potential and performance, about the consequences of never being held to real standards. I spent my lunch hour reviewing similar termination cases I'd handled in the past, looking for precedents and best practices. I wanted this to be handled flawlessly, not just for Sterling's sake, but because I knew every detail would be scrutinized by my family when the story inevitably came out. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling & Associates' office building at 8:30 a.m. sharp. It was a sleek, modern space not unlike my own company's headquarters. I checked in with reception and was escorted to a conference room where Linda was waiting with a stack of documentation. Here's everything we have, Linda said, handing me the files. Attendance records, work samples, email correspondence, everything. I reviewed the materials quickly. It was even worse than Linda had described. Sarah had missed 6 days of work in 3 weeks without proper notice, and she'd also submitted 3 separate pieces of work that were clearly copied from other sources. Her email communications with colleagues were unprofessional at best, and she'd apparently spent multiple afternoons on the phone arranging personal matters while sitting at her desk. This is definitely grounds for immediate termination, I confirmed. The plagiarism alone would be sufficient, but the attendance and professionalism issues create a clear pattern. Linda nodded. Should we call her into the conference room? Yes, but let me handle the conversation. I'll need you present as a witness, but I'd prefer to lead the discussion. A few minutes later, Sarah walked into the conference room. She was wearing a stylish dress that I recognized as one she'd charged to Mom and Dad's credit card, and she had the confident stride of someone who believed she was untouchable. She stopped dead when she saw me. Jess? Her voice was surprised but still carried that familiar condescending tone. What are you doing here? Are you here begging for a maid job? I met her gaze, smiling calmly. No, Sarah. I'm here to hand you your termination letter. The color drained from her face completely. She actually stumbled backward a step, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the doorframe. What? What are you talking about? She stammered. I gestured to the chair across from me. Please, sit down. We need to discuss your employment status at Sterling & Associates. Sarah's eyes darted between me and Linda, confusion and panic replacing her earlier smugness. I don't understand. Jess, what is this? Some kind of joke? This is not a joke, I said, my voice professionally neutral. I'm Jessica Martinez, Director of Human Resources at Morrison & Associates. Sterling & Associates has contracted our firm to handle your termination due to multiple performance and conduct violations. Sarah sank into the chair, her hands visibly shaking. Termination? But I just started. There must be some mistake. I opened the file in front of me. According to the documentation provided by Sterling & Associates, you've been absent from work 6 times in 3 weeks without following proper notification procedures. You've submitted work that contains significant plagiarized content, including entire paragraphs lifted verbatim from multiple competitor websites. Your email communications have been unprofessional, and multiple colleagues have reported that you spent substantial work hours on personal phone calls and social media. That's not. Sarah's voice trailed off. She knew it was all true. Linda spoke up for the first time since Sarah entered the room. Ms. Martinez, I want to be clear that this decision is based solely on job performance and professional conduct. It has nothing to do with personal relationships or any other factors. Sarah's head snapped up. Personal relationships? What does that mean? Jess, did you do this? Did you get me fired? I didn't get you fired, Sarah. You got yourself fired. I'm simply here in my professional capacity to handle the termination process. The reality was finally sinking in. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, something I'd never seen from her before, genuine fear. But I need this job, she whispered. Mom and Dad. They're so proud. They think I'm finally. What am I going to tell them? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered every dismissive comment, every time my achievements were minimized, every instance of being called lazy or unambitious while working my ass off to build a career. You'll figure it out, I said calmly, sliding the termination paperwork across the table. You'll need to sign these documents acknowledging receipt of your termination notice. Your final paycheck will be processed according to company policy, and you'll need to return any company property immediately. Sarah stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. I can't believe this is happening. A week ago, you were the family disappointment living at home, and now you're what? Some big shot executive. I'm the same person I've always been, Sarah. The difference is that some people actually bothered to notice what I was accomplishing. She looked up at me with a mixture of resentment and something that might have been respect. How long have you been? I mean, what's your actual job title? Director of Human Resources. I've been in that position for 2 years. Before that, I was Senior HR Manager. Linda added helpfully, Morrison & Associates specifically requested Ms. Martinez for this assignment. She has an excellent reputation in the industry for handling sensitive personnel matters. Sarah's mouth fell open. Director? You're a director? But we're only 3 years apart. Age doesn't determine capability, I replied. Work ethic, competence, and professionalism do. The words hung in the air. Sarah signed the termination papers with a shaky hand, gathered her few personal items from her desk, and left the building without another word. As I drove back to my office, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, the karmic justice was almost too perfect to believe. But there was also sadness. This hadn't really been about Sarah, not entirely. It had been about years of being undervalued, misunderstood, and dismissed by the people who should have supported me most. That evening, I was just settling into some takeout Chinese food and a Netflix documentary when my phone started ringing. Mom. Jessica, we need to talk. Her voice was strained, none of the usual warmth she reserved for conversations about Sarah. What's going on? Sarah came home today. She was She was let go from her job. I'm sorry to hear that. There was a pause. She said you were there. She said you were the one who. Jessica, what exactly do you do for a living? I took a deep breath. For 5 years, I'd been living at home while they assumed I was barely scraping by in some entry-level position. They'd never asked for details, never shown interest in my work, never bothered to learn about my actual career progression. I'm the Director of Human Resources at Morrison & Associates. We're a consulting firm that specializes in organizational development and personnel management. Another long pause. Director? Jessica, that sounds like a management position. It is. I manage a team of 12 people and oversee all HR functions for the company and our clients. Our clients? We provide HR consulting services to other companies. Today, Sterling & Associates contracted us to handle a termination. I was assigned to the case because I specialize in sensitive personnel transitions. The silence stretched on for so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice much quieter than before. Jessica, why didn't you ever tell us about your job? Your real job? The question hit me harder than I expected. When would I have told you? When you were asking me why I wasn't more ambitious like Sarah. When Dad was explaining how Sarah's entry-level position showed more initiative than my safe little HR job. When you were kicking me out for being a freeloader. We didn't kick you out. We just thought. You thought I was a disappointment. You thought I was lazy and unambitious and content to just coast through life. You never asked about my work, never showed interest in my achievements, never bothered to learn what I actually did for 40 hours a week. Mom was quiet for a moment. Sarah says you make a lot of money. I do fine. She says your apartment is nice. It's comfortable. Another pause. Jessica, I think we owe you an apology. We didn't realize. You didn't realize because you never asked. For 5 years, I lived in that house contributing financially while you assumed I was barely getting by. I got promoted 4 times and never mentioned it because every conversation about work turned into a lecture about how I should be more like Sarah. We just wanted you to reach your potential. What do you think I've been doing? The frustration I've been suppressing for years finally bubbled over. I've been working my ass off since the day I graduated college. I've built a successful career from the ground up. I manage budgets, personnel decisions, and strategic planning for multiple companies. I'm respected in my industry and sought after for my expertise. But none of that mattered to you because it didn't fit the narrative you'd created about who I was supposed to be. The phone was quiet except for the sound of Mom crying softly. Your father and I? We're very proud of Sarah for getting that job. We bragged about her to everyone. But now she's. And you were the one who. I was doing my job, Mom. A job I'm good at, a job I've worked hard to excel in, a job that apparently none of my family knew existed. Can you come over? Tonight? I think we need to talk. All of us. I looked around my apartment, my beautiful, spacious apartment with its city views and modern amenities, paid for by the successful career my family had never bothered to learn about. I don't think so. Not tonight. Please, Jessica. We were wrong. We see that now. You were wrong about a lot of things. But me losing my job isn't what made you wrong. You were wrong the whole time, and it took Sarah's failure for you to even consider the possibility. The conversation ended shortly after that. Over the next few weeks, my parents called several times, each conversation a little more apologetic, a little more aware of how badly they'd misunderstood the situation. Sarah, to her credit, eventually found another job, a smaller company, lower pay, but she seemed to be taking it more seriously. 3 months later, I was promoted again, this time to Vice President of Human Resources. Morrison & Associates had landed several major contracts, partly due to the reputation I built in the industry. I was 29 years old and running the entire HR division of a successful consulting firm. When I called to tell my parents about the promotion, Dad answered the phone. Jessica. How are you, honey? The warmth in his voice was genuine but still felt strange after so many years of indifference. I'm good, Dad. I called to tell you some news. I got promoted again. I'm now Vice President of Human Resources. Vice President? His voice was filled with the kind of pride I'd spent decades wanting to hear. Jessica, that's incredible. We're so proud of you. Thanks, Dad. You know, I was talking to Jim at work yesterday, telling him about your career. He was amazed. He said his daughter is in HR too, but she's just starting out, and he was wondering if you might have any advice for her. I smiled despite myself. After 26 years of being invisible, suddenly everyone wanted to know about Jessica's successful career. I'd be happy to talk with her. And Jessica? I know we haven't always. I know we didn't understand what you were building. But we're proud of you. We're so proud of who you've become. The words were nice to hear, but they came with a bitter knowledge that it had taken Sarah's failure for them to see my success. Still, I was learning to find peace with that. Some people need contrast to recognize what was already there. 6 months later, Sarah and I had coffee for the first time since the termination incident. She was doing well at her new job, had learned some hard lessons about professionalism and work ethic, and seemed genuinely different than the entitled person who'd walked into that conference room. "I owe you an apology," she said, stirring her latte nervously. "Not just for what I said that day, but for years of not seeing how hard you were working." "Thank you. That means a lot. I always thought you had it easy, you know? Living at home, same job, same routine. I didn't realize you were actually successful. Like, really successful." I nodded. "I know you didn't realize it. None of you did. Can I ask you something?" She looked genuinely curious rather than competitive for the first time in memory. "How did you do it? How did you build that kind of career so quietly?" "I just focused on doing good work. Every day, every project, every interaction. I treated everyone with respect, learned from my mistakes, and never stopped trying to improve. Success isn't always loud, Sarah. Sometimes it's just consistent." She was quiet for a moment. "I think I understand why you didn't fight back all those years. You didn't need to prove anything to us because you were already proving it to yourself." Something like that. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it took something so awful for all of us to see what was right in front of us. As I walked back to my office that afternoon, I reflected on everything that had happened. The revenge had been satisfying, certainly, but the real victory wasn't in Sarah's termination. It was in the career I built despite the lack of support, the life I'd created through my own determination, and the eventual recognition that I was exactly who I'd always known myself to be. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply becoming so successful that the people who underestimated you have no choice but to finally see who you really are. And sometimes that's enough.